Everyone smiled at the mafia boss and ignored his autistic son. He sat alone, counting the lights. A waitress named Nora Hale watched it happen again and again. She broke the rule to stay invisible, walked over, and led him into a waltz. The music kept playing, but the whole room stopped. The boss stared. The cousin's face tightened. Doors that should not open started to matter. That short dance put a target on Nora, pulled the son into the center, and cracked a plan no one else could see. One small detail, only he noticed, would flip the night. The question is, who pays for it? The ballroom of the Romano estate gleamed under the golden lights, filled with laughter that didn't reach anyone's eyes. The guests were men and women who traded favors instead of words, each step rehearsed like a performance. Waiters moved carefully, balancing trays of champagne that cost more than their rent. Among them was Nora Hale, 23, exhausted from double shifts, but alert enough to read a room. She had learned how to blend in, how to exist without being noticed. Yet something about this night felt off, something she couldn't quite place, something sitting quietly in the farthest corner. The celebration was for Adrian Romano, the most feared and respected man in the city. His empire stretched from politicians to ports, his influence untouchable. People toasted his success with trembling smiles, careful to say the right words. But behind all that power sat his greatest secret, his only son Eli, who rarely spoke, rarely looked up, and never fit the image of a future heir. Adrian's men called him the quiet one, though everyone knew what they really meant. They called him a disappointment when the boss wasn't listening, and tonight, like always, they acted as if he wasn't there. Nora's job was simple: refill glasses, stay silent, and disappear when people started to notice her. It was safer that way. The rich had sharp eyes and short tempers, but each time she passed the marble pillars, her gaze caught the same image. A young man in a black suit sitting alone, staring at the chandelier. His fingers turned a small metal sphere over and over like it was the only steady thing in the world. No one approached him. No one even glanced. He was surrounded by people yet seemed completely outside of everything happening. She didn't know who he was at first, only that something about him felt different. His stillness didn't look rude or strange. It looked focused, as if he was studying the way the light bounced across the crystals above. He didn't flinch when laughter exploded near him, or when waiters brushed past his chair. He existed in a world of quiet patterns that no one else could see. Then she overheard one of the guards whisper his name, Eli Romano, the mafia boss's son. That was when she realized why everyone kept pretending he didn't exist. In that world of wealth and crime, imperfection was weakness. Adrian Romano built his empire on fear and control. A son who didn't talk much, who avoided eye contact, who lived inside his own patterns. That wasn't a successor, that was a flaw. Nora understood the cruelty of judgment. Her younger brother had been different too, and people treated him the same way, as if kindness was a waste of time. Watching Eli tonight brought all those memories back. She tried to push them down, to focus on her job, but her eyes refused to look anywhere else. The orchestra's music climbed higher, and the guests filled the dance floor. Dresses spun under chandeliers like floating jewels, but Eli stayed seated, motionless in his corner. Nora felt a pull toward him, though she didn't understand why. Maybe it was pity, or maybe it was something else, something about how he focused on beauty in a room full of greed. When one of Adrian's nephews, Marco, passed by Eli, he smirked and made a cruel comment loud enough for his friends to laugh. No one stopped him. No one said a word. It was just another night of silence. Nora tightened her grip on the tray, feeling the humiliation as if it were her own. Eli didn't react, but she noticed his thumb moving faster on the metal sphere, a sign he had heard every word. Marco's group laughed, satisfied with their small act of power, and moved away. The rest of the crowd kept pretending they hadn't noticed. Nora wondered how someone could be surrounded by hundreds of people and still be treated like they didn't exist. She turned away to hide the emotion in her face, but her mind kept circling back to that lonely chair. Across the ballroom, Adrian stood surrounded by city officials and businessmen. His deep voice carried authority, his laughter controlled and sharp. He never once looked toward his son. To everyone else it seemed deliberate, a signal that Eli was not to be acknowledged. Nora realized the boy wasn't just ignored, he was erased. His father's silence had taught everyone how to treat him. That realization burned in her chest. She had seen cruelty before, but this was something colder. It was indifference disguised as order, a rule no one dared to break. Until tonight. Her boss, Mrs. Kent, appeared beside her like a shadow, snapping her fingers. Table 12 needed refills, and Nora had been standing still too long. She forced a nod and moved, trying to focus on the task. Her tray shook slightly as she poured, the sound of champagne fizzing louder than usual in her ears. She was angry but couldn't show it. Around her, the laughter continued, the music swelled, and Eli remained in the corner, tracing circles of light only he could understand. The sight stayed in her mind like a reflection she couldn't turn away from. When the orchestra shifted to a slower tune, the tone of the night softened. Couples took to the floor in practiced elegance, moving in sync under the chandelier. Nora refilled one last glass and paused near the edge of the room. From where she stood, she could see Ailey's face clearly for the first time. He wasn't emotionless. His eyes followed the light, studying the way it scattered. He seemed calm, but his hands betrayed small movements, his rhythm matching the flicker of the crystals. It was like he found peace in patterns, while chaos ruled around him. Marco passed again, already tipsy from too much wine, and stopped near Eli's chair. His laughter cut through the music as he whispered something mocking. The people around him laughed, pretending not to notice Adrian across the room. Eli's hands tightened around the small metal sphere. The shine of the object caught Nora's eye. She didn't know what it was, but she could tell it mattered to him. Marco smirked and walked away, proud of his cruelty. Nora felt heat rise in her chest. Every instinct said to stay quiet, but her conscience refused to obey anymore. Her breath grew heavy as she watched Eli's eyes fall back on the chandelier. He didn't defend himself, didn't move, didn't speak. He simply went back to the light. Something about that quiet resistance broke something inside her. The same crowd that worshipped power had no idea what real strength looked like. She knew she was about to do something foolish. Every step she imagined felt dangerous, but she couldn't shake the thought that maybe all Eli needed was someone who didn't treat him like glass. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the need to do something right. She set her tray down on a side table. No one noticed yet. She adjusted her uniform, smoothing the wrinkles out of habit. For years she had been told her job was to stay invisible, but she was tired of invisibility. She took one step away from the safety of the crowd, then another, her soft shoes soundless on the carpet. The distance between her and Eli felt enormous, even though it was only a few feet. Her mind raced with the possible outcomes, losing her job, angering the boss, or worse. Still, her feet kept moving. The crowd began to notice. Conversations softened, the music still playing but no longer filling the room. People turned confused about why one of the waitresses was walking toward the corner. Marco's smirk faded as realization dawned. Mrs. Kent caught sight of her from across the ballroom and shook her head violently in warning. Nora ignored everyone. She had already decided. Eli sat still, unaware of the ripple forming around him. Her heart pounded, but her expression stayed calm. She reached the edge of his chair, and for a moment everything in the room felt suspended in time. Eli's eyes remained fixed on the lights above, unaware of the chaos his stillness caused. Nora stood beside him, unsure how to begin. She didn't want to scare him or draw more attention than necessary. The music shifted into a waltz, soft and steady. Nora took a breath and extended her hand toward him. The room froze. He looked down, then up at her hand, processing the movement. His fingers hesitated, then released the metal sphere onto the chair. When his hand touched hers, a quiet gasp rolled through the crowd. The invisible boy had been seen. The ballroom, once filled with laughter, turned into a sea of whispers. Every head turned toward the corner where Nora stood holding Eli's hand. Her pulse thudded in her ears, but she stayed still, steady for him. Eli's hand was cool and hesitant, his eyes darting toward the moving lights rather than her face. Somewhere behind them, Marco's expression twisted into disbelief. He couldn't understand why a waitress would do something so foolish. Nora didn't understand it fully either, only that walking away now would feel like betraying something far more important than fear or rules. Eli rose to his feet, guided by her gentle pull. He looked uncertain, but not afraid. Around them, the orchestra's rhythm filled the silence between heartbeats. Nora moved slowly toward the dance floor, keeping her steps small, patient. Eli followed, his gaze shifting from the lights to her movements, copying her pattern. They reached the edge of the marble floor, as people cleared space, unsure whether to watch or leave. No one spoke, no one dared interrupt. Adrian's glass paused midair from across the room, the Mafia Boss's sharp eyes fixed on the waitress leading his son into a waltz. Nora placed one hand lightly on Eli's shoulder, guiding him through the first steps. His movements were stiff, uncoordinated, but his effort was clear. She didn't speak, only matched her rhythm to his breathing. For a moment, it was like time had stopped. The ballroom, the money, the power, none of it mattered. It was just a girl teaching a lonely man how to feel included. Slowly, the room began to breathe again, watching as the invisible son of Adrian Romano moved across the floor, not as a ghost, but as someone alive, responding to kindness for the first time. Marco's jaw tightened. He leaned toward one of his friends and muttered something angry, but the words vanished under the music. The sight of Eli dancing, even clumsily, felt like an insult. This wasn't supposed to happen. The boy was supposed to be ignored, forgotten. But here he was, stealing every gaze. Adrian's expression remained unreadable, his glass still in hand, his mind calculating. Nora didn't see any of them. She only saw Eli beginning to follow the rhythm, his body moving in patterns that made sense to him. His steps were mechanical, but his effort was genuine. Eli's hand trembled slightly, but he stayed with her, matching her slow turns. Nora felt the tension in his shoulders fade bit by bit. For him, it wasn't about dancing. It was about trusting that the pattern would hold. She guided him gently through each motion, counting silently in her head. The room watched, stunned by something pure happening, in a place that had forgotten innocence. And in that stillness, Nora felt like something inside both of them had shifted forever. She had broken every rule to remind one person he wasn't broken at all. Before continuing the story, Nora's quiet defiance deserves a moment. If you're watching this and want to know how far this act will reach, take a second to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell us where you're listening from. Now back to the dance that changed everything. The song ended, and applause for the band filled the room, but the attention wasn't on the music anymore. Every guest whispered about the waitress and the sun. Nora stepped back, lowering her hand. Eli's gaze shifted from her face back to the chandelier. The moment of connection faded as quickly as it had come. The noise returned, laughter, glasses clinking, people pretending it hadn't happened. Marco turned away, furious. Adrian finally set down his drink. He said nothing, but his stare followed Nora until she disappeared behind the serving door, her pulse still uneven from what she'd done. Back in the catering room, Nora's supervisor was waiting, arms crossed and face pale with anger. She didn't yell, which was worse. She simply told Nora to get her things and leave. The rules had been broken, and no one disobeyed orders around powerful men like Adrian Romano. Nora tried to explain, but words didn't matter. Her boss said that drawing attention was the worst crime a servant could commit. As she packed her apron, she wondered if kindness had really been such a dangerous act. The muffled music from the ballroom felt distant, almost unreal now. Nora walked toward the exit, trying not to look back. The other staff avoided her eyes, afraid of being connected to her. Just as she reached the door, a shadow blocked her path. It was Rocco, Adrian's bodyguard, tall and expressionless, his suit perfectly pressed. He didn't raise his voice. He just said the boss wanted to see her. The words felt heavy, final. Nora froze, unsure if this was punishment or something worse. The ballroom behind her buzzed with laughter again, but she knew her night was far from over. She followed him without asking questions. Rocco led her through a narrow corridor away from the crowd and noise. Each step echoed softly on the polished floor. They stopped before a large oak door guarded by 2 more men. One opened it without a word. Inside was a quiet study filled with dark wood and books, a sharp contrast to the glittering ballroom outside. Adrian Romano sat behind a wide desk, his fingers loosely wrapped around a glass of scotch. He didn't look up right away. Nora stood in the doorway, small against the shadows, unsure if she should speak or wait for him to begin. When Adrian finally looked at her, his eyes were calm but unreadable. He studied her like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided how to solve. His voice was low and steady when he asked her name. Then he listed things about her life. Her college, her mother's health, her part-time jobs. Every fact was true. He knew everything. Nora's breath caught, realizing he had already researched her. He asked why she had touched his son, what she wanted in return. She couldn't find words that sounded smart enough. All she had was honesty, and it felt useless. She told him she saw someone lonely. Adrian didn't believe her. In his world, no one did anything without motive. He leaned back, silent for several seconds, then told her she had drawn unwanted attention. His tone never changed, but each word carried weight. He said she had stepped into a world she didn't belong in, and reminded her that his family valued obedience above all. The threat wasn't loud, but it was clear. He told her to forget what happened, to leave, and to never speak to Eli again. Nora nodded, her throat too tight for words. As Rocco escorted her out, Nora glanced toward the ballroom one last time. The music had changed again, but Eli was gone. Maybe his father had already taken him home. Maybe he was being scolded for something he hadn't understood. The thought made her chest ache. Outside, the cold night air hit her face, grounding her back in the world she knew, a world where people like her stayed small and safe. Yet deep down she knew she wouldn't forget what happened. A line had been crossed, and something inside her refused to go back. The following days dragged by in silence. Nora tried to bury herself in routine, working at another catering job, attending her art classes, and visiting her mother at the nursing home. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eli's hand resting in hers, hesitant but willing. She wondered if he even remembered the dance, or if it had been another small moment in a long chain of forgotten nights. Sometimes she thought she saw black cars near her building, parked too long. She told herself it was paranoia. Still, the feeling of being watched never left. 2 weeks later, while she was leaving her college building, she noticed a familiar figure waiting by the gate. It was Rocco again. He wasn't threatening, just impossible to ignore. He said the boss wanted to see her. Nora told him she didn't work for that company anymore, but he simply opened the car door and waited. Students walked past, glancing curiously. She realized she didn't have a choice. The ride was silent, the city lights reflecting off the tinted windows. By the time the car stopped outside a tall brownstone, she had already accepted she might not return home tonight. The house wasn't what she expected. It was quiet, elegant, and filled with art instead of bodyguards. Rocco led her inside and gestured toward the living room. There, surrounded by stacks of notebooks and sketches, sat Eli. He didn't look up. He was sketching something intricate, his pencil moving fast and precise. Nora stood frozen. He looked calmer but still far away, trapped inside his thoughts. Adrian appeared a moment later, dressed casually, his presence still powerful. He said Eli had been different since that night, quieter, distracted, focused on shapes and light. He needed her help. Adrian told Nora she would work here now. Her task was to catalog his art collection, which happened to be in the same room Eli used every day. The pay was high enough to change her life. She understood what that meant. This wasn't a request. Adrian wanted her near his son, watching him, maybe guiding him. The reason didn't matter. Refusal wasn't an option. Nora agreed, though she felt her freedom slipping away with every word. As she looked at Eli again, she wondered if this was fate or another dangerous test from a man who trusted no one. Her first day at the brownstone felt like stepping into another world. The house was silent except for the faint scratch of pencil against paper. Eli sat by the window drawing, surrounded by diagrams and mechanical sketches. Nora set up her small desk across the room with boxes of files about rare art pieces. She spoke softly while she worked, describing each piece aloud without expecting a response. Eli didn't look at her, but she saw his pencil pause at certain words: geometry, symmetry, pattern. She realized he was listening, even if he never looked her way. By the second day, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy anymore, it was thoughtful. Nora kept talking while sorting through books, explaining how certain designs repeated across centuries. She told him about how artists found beauty in precision. Eli didn't reply, but small changes appeared. He stopped tapping his fingers as much. His breathing matched her rhythm as she worked. When she left that evening, she noticed a new sketch on the table, a drawing of the chandelier from the ballroom. It wasn't just accurate, it was mathematically perfect. She understood then how his mind truly worked. Nora returned the next morning and found another drawing beside her notes. This one showed the pattern of marble veins from the ballroom floor, each swirl mapped like a landscape. Eli never handed her these sketches directly, but she understood they were for her. It was his way of talking. She left small notes in response, thanking him or pointing out details she admired. Though he never spoke, his drawings grew more frequent, more detailed. The quiet between them became a language of its own. Adrian watched from afar, noticing his son's engagement for the first time in years. Days turned into weeks, and the routine settled. Nora worked, Eli drew, and Adrian pretended not to notice his growing interest. Every night she went home exhausted, but strangely fulfilled. She no longer feared Adrian's power the way she once did. The man was dangerous, but she could sense that beneath his control was worry, maybe guilt. She didn't know what he expected from her anymore, to guide Eli or to spy on him. Either way, she couldn't stop caring. The boy who had once been invisible now filled every corner of her thoughts. Marco, however, noticed the change too. He visited the brownstone occasionally, pretending to check on the collection. His polite smile couldn't hide his resentment. He saw how Adrian spoke about Eli differently now, how his father's tone softened when discussing him. That shift meant trouble for Marco. For years he had expected to inherit control of the family when Adrian stepped down. Eli's new presence threatened everything. Marco's charm faded behind closed doors, replaced with quiet rage. He started asking questions about Nora, wanting to know why a waitress suddenly worked so closely with the boss's son. Nora noticed Marco's visits and the tension they brought. Whenever he entered the room, Eli's posture changed. Shoulders tightening, focus breaking, he never looked up while Marco was there. Nora didn't speak to Marco, but she could feel his suspicion, the way he lingered by the door, the way his eyes scanned her desk as if searching for secrets. Adrian seemed unaware or chose to ignore it. He was too focused on Eli's progress, proud that his son was finally showing awareness of the world around him. But Marco's resentment was quietly building into something dangerous. Adrian decided it was time to test Eli in a real setting. He planned to bring him to an upcoming business meeting. Something small, just a show of confidence. Nora tried to convince him it was a bad idea, explaining that Eli struggled in loud, unpredictable environments. Adrian brushed off her concern. He said Eli had to face the world eventually. His tone ended the discussion. Nora left uneasy, afraid of what would happen if things went wrong. She knew Marco would be there, and deep down she sensed he wanted it to go wrong. The meeting took place in a private suite at an old hotel, a place where peace talks between rival families often happened. The air smelled of cigar smoke and false respect. Adrian arrived with Rocco and Eli, who clutched a small puzzle box. Nora had given him to help him stay calm. Marco followed, smiling too much. Nora wasn't there, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Back at the brownstone, she looked at the empty chair where Eli usually sat and hoped the night would stay quiet. She didn't know that chaos had already started to unfold. Inside the hotel suite, the atmosphere was heavy. The men from both families sat around a polished table, pretending respect while calculating each other's worth. Adrian spoke first, his voice steady and firm, setting the tone of control. Eli sat against the wall, away from the noise, his puzzle box turning slowly in his hands. He didn't follow the words, only the rhythms, the tones, and the flickers of light reflecting off the table. Marco stood behind his uncle, every move rehearsed, every smile hiding a purpose. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping faint patterns on the window glass. Eli's mind worked differently. While others measured loyalty through words, he measured patterns, breathing, motion, sound. Something in the room didn't add up. He noticed a faint hum from one of the lamps in the corner, a sound that didn't belong. He noticed the drip from the bathroom faucet, steady at first, then irregular. He noticed how one of the rival guards near the door kept shifting weight between his feet every few seconds. To anyone else, it was meaningless. To Eli it meant timing, coordination, something synchronized for a reason that wasn't peace. Marco pretended to listen to his uncle's negotiation but kept glancing at his watch. His jaw tightened each time the second hand passed a mark. Eli caught that too. The man's lips moved with every minute that ticked by, counting something under his breath. Eli's breathing slowed as his senses aligned. The hum, the dripping water, the tapping foot. They formed a pattern, one that felt deliberate. He shifted his eyes toward the lamp again. The pitch of the hum was sharp, mechanical, almost like interference from a hidden transmitter. The entire rhythm of the room felt wrong. Adrian continued speaking about territory and profits, unaware of the danger building around him. His rival smiled too easily, nodding at all the wrong times. Rocco stood nearby, scanning faces, but not seeing what Eli saw. To Eli, the room was a map of signals, sights, sounds, and timing all connecting. His pulse quickened, not from fear, but from calculation. The dripping faucet stopped for a second, then resumed, its new rhythm matching Marco's tapping finger. That was the final piece. Eli knew something was about to happen, though he couldn't explain it in words anyone would understand. He stood up, clutching the puzzle box tighter, and turned toward the table. Adrian's attention flicked toward him, confused but distracted by the rising argument across the table. Eli's breathing deepened. He glanced at the lamp again, then suddenly lunged forward. The crash echoed through the suite as the lamp toppled, shattering across the floor. Rocco moved instantly, stepping in front of Adrian, but Eli didn't stop. He shoved the table's leg with his foot, tilting it sharply. The men shouted, chairs scraped, and for a split second, chaos broke the careful balance. then gunfire erupted. The sound of bullets tore through the air. Glass shattered, men ducked, and screams filled the suite. Rocco returned fire before the others could aim. Adrian dropped to the floor, pulling his son with him. Marco froze, his perfect composure cracking for the first time. Ely covered his ears, his mind racing from the noise, the flashing lights, and the broken rhythm. But his body had already moved them out of the line of fire. When the gunfire stopped, smoke filled the room. Several men were down. The hidden guards who had planned the ambush were among them. For several seconds, no one spoke. The rival boss shouted curses before being dragged out by his surviving men. Rocco checked Adrian for wounds and found only scratches. Marco stepped forward, playing the loyal nephew, but his eyes betrayed panic. Adrian turned to his son, confused and breathless. Ely sat against the wall, hands shaking, his puzzle box still in his grip. He rocked slightly, eyes shut tight, blocking out the voices around him. He couldn't process the noise, but the pattern still played in his head, confirming what his instincts had already known. The trap had failed. Adrian knelt beside his son, unsure whether to comfort or question him. He asked what had made him move, but Ely didn't respond. Rocco's confusion mirrored his boss's. No one could understand how the quiet boy had saved them from a planned execution. Marco crouched nearby, masking fear behind concern. He muttered something about the boy's episode, calling it coincidence. Adrian ignored him for once. He looked around the destroyed room, then back at the shattered lamp. He didn't know why, but he sensed that Eli's strange instincts had seen something everyone else had missed. Later that night, the hotel floor was cleared, and the family's cars waited outside. Adrian and Rocco helped Ely into one of them, wrapping a blanket over his shoulders. The boy didn't speak or look up. His fingers kept tapping the puzzle box, tracing invisible shapes. Marco rode in another car, silent, his eyes cold. He replayed the moment Ely flipped the table and realized how close his plan had come to success. The failed ambush wasn't just a loss, it was exposure. Someone would start asking questions, and Marco knew the only person who could ruin him was Ely. The city buzzed with rumors the next day. People whispered that the meeting had gone wrong, that Adrian had been ambushed but survived. No one knew how. Within the Romano circle, questions spread like wildfire. Some said the boss's luck had returned. Others called it divine protection. Only a few understood that the reason sat quietly in his father's house, refusing to eat, speak, or even leave his room. Nora didn't know the details yet, but she sensed something had happened. She saw the news headline about gunfire at a midtown hotel and felt dread twist in her stomach. When Adrian finally called her back to the brownstone, she saw the weight of the night etched into his face. He didn't look like the untouchable man from the ballroom anymore. He looked tired, older, human. Ely sat in the corner, knees to his chest, unmoving. His puzzle box lay untouched on the floor. The air in the room felt brittle. Adrian admitted his son hadn't spoken since the attack. He said the doctors couldn't reach him. He asked Nora to do what they couldn't, to reach him the way she once had on that dance floor. Nora stepped quietly into Eli's room. She didn't try to talk right away. She sat on the floor near him but not too close, mirroring his posture. Minutes passed in silence. Then an hour. She stayed still, letting him feel her presence. She didn't fill the air with noise. She simply waited. Finally, his hand twitched toward the puzzle box. She slid it closer to him. He didn't take it yet, but his eyes shifted, acknowledging the gesture. It was small, but it was a beginning, proof that he still saw her, even in the middle of his closed-off world. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and steady. She mentioned how patterns could be disrupted and then rebuilt, how broken things could still work if arranged the right way. Ely's breathing changed slightly. He picked up the pencil lying beside him and started drawing on a blank sheet of paper. The lines came fast, clean, and precise. Nora leaned closer but didn't interrupt. The shapes began forming into something familiar, a floor plan, detailed and sharp. As the lines connected, she realized what he was doing. He was reconstructing the hotel room from memory. Nora called Adrian to the doorway. Ely kept drawing, adding small notes and markings only he understood. He labeled sounds, the faucet, the lamp, the shifting feet near the door. He drew arrows that showed motion and timing. The level of detail stunned them both. It wasn't art, it was evidence. At the edge of the page, Ely drew something small, a tiny emblem pinned on a jacket. He shaded it carefully. Nora leaned in and recognized it, a falcon, the same symbol belonging to the rival family that had supposedly attacked them. Adrian froze. The emblem didn't make sense. None of his men should have had that mark. Then realization crept in. Someone from his own side had been part of it. Nora explained that Eli must have seen it during the meeting. He noticed the pattern didn't fit, that someone wearing that emblem was pretending to be loyal. Adrian's jaw tightened. He took the drawing and looked closer at the shape. It wasn't just any man. Eli had drawn the jacket perfectly down to its stitching. The style matched Marco's. The realization hit like a physical blow. For a moment, Adrian said nothing. His breathing deepened, his hand still holding the paper. Marco had been his blood, his brother's son, the man he had trusted most. Betrayal wasn't new in his world, but this one cut deeper. He asked Eli quietly if he was sure, but Eli only tapped the puzzle box once and pointed to the sketch again. The gesture was clear. Marco's betrayal wasn't a theory, it was truth. Adrian straightened, his composure returning like armor. He told Rocco to bring Marco to the house. His voice carried no emotion, only quiet finality. Nora stayed in the room with Eli after Adrian left. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew it wouldn't be peaceful. She told Eli softly that he had done the right thing, that he had seen what others couldn't. He didn't react, but his breathing steadied. The puzzle box rested in his lap, the same rhythm returning to his fingers. In another room, the sound of footsteps echoed, Rocco preparing for what was coming. Nora knew the rules of that world. Betrayal was never forgiven. She wished she could shield Eli from what came next. When Marco arrived, he walked into the brownstone smiling, pretending concern. He greeted the guards, acting confused by the tension in the air. Adrian waited in the library, standing by the fireplace with Eli's sketchbook open on the table. The room felt colder than usual. Marco's eyes flicked to the drawing, then back to his uncle's face. He began to speak, spinning words about loyalty and revenge, blaming the rivals for everything. Adrian let him talk. He wanted to hear the lies firsthand before tearing them apart. The sound of Marco's voice filled the space like static before a storm. Adrian interrupted him mid-sentence. He asked if Marco had anything pinned inside his jacket. The question stopped Marco cold. For a second, confusion flickered across his face, then fear. He tried to laugh it off, saying it was nonsense, but his hand instinctively touched his chest. Adrian's expression didn't change. He told him to open it. Marco hesitated. The silence stretched until Rocco stepped forward, ready to do it for him. Finally, Marco moved, unbuttoning his suit. The silver falcon emblem glinted faintly in the light. There was no more denying it. The betrayal was exposed for all to see. Marco stumbled over excuses, saying it was planted, that he'd been tricked. Adrian didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped closer, each word deliberate. He said his son had seen the truth, and the truth never lied. Marco tried to plead, claiming loyalty, reminding him of family. Adrian struck him across the face, the sharp sound echoing through the library. Marco fell back, his pride and control shattered. Adrian told him family meant nothing when it was poisoned from within. His tone didn't waver. The punishment was already decided. Rocco waited for the order, silent and ready. Eli appeared in the doorway, unnoticed at first. His steps were soft, but his presence shifted the room's energy. He held the puzzle box close, his eyes calm. Marco saw him and froze, fear flickering behind his anger. Eli looked from his father to his cousin, then to the open sketchbook on the table. He walked forward and set the box beside it. His voice, quiet but steady, broke the silence. For the first time, he said, the system was broken. Nora, standing near the hall, understood the meaning. He wasn't just talking about their world, but their family. Adrian turned toward his son, shock flickering for a brief moment. It was the first full sentence he had ever heard from him. The words carried no anger, only clarity. Marco tried to speak again, but Adrian raised a hand. He looked at Eli, seeing something he had never noticed before. Strength that didn't need violence, understanding that didn't need words. He nodded once, accepting his son's unspoken judgment. Then he turned to Rocco and gave the command. Rocco grabbed Marco by the arm. The betrayal would be handled in silence, away from the family's walls. Marco shouted, threatened, begged, but none of it mattered. Rocco dragged him down the hallway, his voice fading with each step. Adrian stood still, breathing deeply. For years he had tried to shape power through fear, but tonight he learned his quietest son had seen further than any of them. He looked at Eli, who stood beside Nora now, expression calm. The boy who once hid from the world had become the one person capable of exposing its lies. Adrian felt something unfamiliar rising inside him, pride mixed with regret for not seeing it sooner. After Marco was gone, the house fell quiet again. Adrian sat heavily in the armchair, staring at the fire. He asked Nora to stay. He wanted her to continue working with Eli, but this time not as an assignment. He wanted her to help him grow, to help him use his gift. She agreed, not because of the pay, but because she saw what Adrian couldn't, that Eli didn't need fixing. He just needed to be understood. From that night on, the brownstone became a different kind of place, filled not with fear but with patience and new beginnings. Weeks passed and the Romano family changed quietly. Adrian still ran his empire, but now he sought Eli's input before major decisions. The boy studied documents, reading patterns others missed, finding flaws in plans, spotting betrayals before they happened. Nora stayed by his side, translating his insights into words his father could use. Together they built a strange balance, power rooted not in fear, but in logic and trust. Every evening, after the work ended, Eli returned to his puzzle box, and sometimes, when the house was still, he would hum softly, tracing the rhythm of their survival. In the weeks that followed Marco's disappearance, the Romano household ran smoother than ever. The men under Adrian noticed the difference too. Meetings ended faster, mistakes reduced, and the boss seemed sharper. What they didn't know was that Eli was quietly behind those changes. His insights came through Nora, who explained them in simple language. Adrian trusted her completely now. He often said nothing but listened while she spoke. The once lonely boy had become a silent architect behind one of the city's most feared empires, turning order out of chaos through patterns only he could see. Nora adapted to this new rhythm easily. Every morning she arrived before sunrise and sat with Eli in the library. He would sketch quietly while she reviewed ledgers and documents. Sometimes she'd read aloud figures about shipments or accounts, and without looking up, Eli would point to the one number that didn't fit. Adrian called it intuition, but Nora knew it was more than that. Eli's mind worked like a perfect system, noticing small things others missed. Each discovery strengthened the boss's faith in him, but it also made the circle of trust around the family even tighter. Rocco remained the silent guardian, always nearby. He respected Nora, though he rarely spoke more than a few words to her. He saw the effect she had on Eli, calm, focused, and confident. The boy no longer flinched at loud noises, no longer hid from company. Adrian watched this transformation with quiet amazement, though part of him feared it too. Power, once a private shield, now rested in the hands of someone who saw the world differently. Adrian wondered if his son's gift would someday outgrow the family's reach, and if that would mean losing control completely. The first test came unexpectedly. One of Adrian's associates, a longtime partner named Franco, brought a new investment proposal. It sounded promising. Shipments, profits, expansion. Everyone agreed except Eli. He sat still, staring at the papers, then lightly tapped the corner of one document 3 times. Nora understood his cue. She studied the file again and found a small inconsistency, an invoice number that didn't match the others. It seemed minor, but when checked, it revealed a hidden transaction meant to drain funds into a rival's account. Adrian's trust in his son deepened, but so did his caution. Word spread quietly through the network that the boss's son had a strange gift. Some men dismissed it as rumor. Others feared it. Those who worked closest to Adrian noticed that mistakes were now punished faster, not through anger but through precision. Adrian no longer relied on intimidation. He relied on information, and that information came from Eli. Nora watched how quickly power changed hands, how knowledge became the new weapon, but she also saw the cost. Eli's world was growing sharper, more mechanical. His eyes stayed on patterns more than people. She worried he was losing something human. One evening, Adrian called her into his office. He poured her a drink and thanked her for what she had done for his son. It was the closest thing to warmth he had ever shown. Then he told her something that made her uneasy. He said a man like Eli needed protection, not just from enemies but from himself. He told her to keep him grounded, to keep him feeling, because the mind without the heart could destroy more than it saves. Nora promised she would. She didn't realize how much that warning would matter in the days ahead. Eli's drawings changed. Instead of art, they began to resemble blueprints, maps of the city, intersections, and warehouse routes. Nora watched him trace paths, connecting them like threads in a web. He didn't explain, but she began to understand he was analyzing power, predicting moves before they happened. When Adrian looked at the sketches, he saw strategy. When Nora looked at them, she saw isolation. Ely had learned how to control the system that once ignored him, but it came at a cost. The world that once frightened him was now bending to his logic, piece by piece. Late one night, Nora found him awake in the library. The room was dim, scattered with sketches. He wasn't drawing the city anymore, but the ballroom where they had met. The chandelier, the marble floor, the swirl of people frozen mid-dance. His pencil moved slower than usual, softer. Nora realized this wasn't analysis. It was memory. She sat beside him quietly. Ely didn't look at her, but his hand paused. For the first time he wrote her name in the corner of the page. She didn't need to say anything. That one gesture said everything he never could. Adrian saw the drawing the next morning and said nothing, but the small smile that crossed his face surprised Nora. The boss had changed. He wasn't the ruthless man she had first met. His tone was quieter, his presence less suffocating. He told her the family would be expanding into new territories, and he wanted Eli's help mapping the safest paths. She agreed, but something about his tone carried concern. He didn't just see his son as an heir anymore. He saw him as the future of everything he had built, and that future frightened him. Days passed as Nora worked with Eli on the new expansion maps. He used colors now: red for danger, blue for safe passage, green for profit. It was an intricate system, impossible for anyone else to decode. Each time she tried to thank him, he only tapped his pencil twice, signaling understanding. Rocco delivered reports daily to Adrian, who began adjusting deals based on the maps. Rivals started losing ground without understanding how. Nora realized Eli's patterns were not just protecting the family anymore, they were changing the entire landscape of the city's underworld. Success drew attention. The police started watching the Romano network more closely, unable to trace how their operations stayed flawless. Rumors spread that Adrian had hired an analyst or some secret genius. Nora worried what would happen if outsiders learned the truth. Ely hated noise, crowds, and confrontation. The attention would crush him. She suggested to Adrian that they slow down expansion, but he refused. He said opportunity didn't wait. She knew what that meant. The same old hunger for control dressed up as strategy. Power was creeping back in, threatening the fragile balance they'd built. The breaking point came when a rival group made a move near the docks. It wasn't an attack, just a shipment interception. But it shook Adrian's pride. He wanted revenge. Eli's maps showed the weakness in their defenses, but Nora argued for patience. Adrian listened but didn't agree. He decided to strike anyway, setting up a confrontation that would remind the city who was in charge. He wanted Eli there again to observe and learn the business. Nora felt sick at the idea, but no one could change the boss's mind once it was made. The decision was final. The meeting was set for a stormy evening. Nora tried to convince Adrian to let Eli stay home, but he refused. Rocco escorted them both to the car. The city lights blurred through the rain as they drove toward the docks. Eli sat silently, clutching his puzzle box tighter than usual. His eyes darted between reflections in the window, watching the repeating flashes of light from passing street lamps. The rhythm calmed him. Nora sat beside him, wishing she could promise safety, but knowing promises meant little in their world. The night felt like it carried too much weight. At the docks, men waited under umbrellas, the air thick with tension. Adrian's convoy pulled up, headlights slicing through rain. Eli stayed in the car, but his eyes scanned everything: the spacing of the vehicles, the number of guards, the direction of shadows. Something about it didn't fit. The men weren't positioned evenly. A few stood too far apart, their focus elsewhere. His hands began to twitch, tapping against his knee. The rhythm of the rain no longer matched. Nora noticed his breathing quicken. He turned to her, expression focused, and tapped the window twice. A warning. The next second, a single gunshot echoed. Chaos erupted across the dockyard. Nora ducked instinctively, pulling Eli down beside her. Rocco shouted orders while Adrian's men returned fire. The rain turned into mist, under the flashes of muzzle light. Eli pressed his palms over his ears, his mind breaking from the sensory overload. But even through the panic, he noticed direction. The gunfire came from the side warehouse, not the meeting point. He pointed toward it, his movements sharp, mechanical. Rocco followed his cue and fired. The hidden gunman fell. The ambush collapsed before it could spread. When the shooting stopped, the rain carried the silence forward. Adrian stepped out of the car, soaked but unhurt. His men checked the area and confirmed what Eli had already seen. The ambush had been small but precise. Someone had planned it carefully, using inside knowledge. Adrian didn't thank anyone, not even Rocco. He just looked at his son, who sat trembling but alert. For the second time, Eli had seen danger before it struck. Adrian realized the truth. Then, his son didn't need to learn the business. The business needed to learn from him. They returned home in silence. Nora helped Eli change into dry clothes, his hand still unsteady. Adrian poured himself a drink, watching the two of them from across the room. He didn't speak, but something shifted in his expression. Not power, not dominance, but understanding. The man who once ruled through fear was beginning to see his empire differently. Nora saw it too. She realized this wasn't just about control anymore. It was about survival, about building something sustainable, something Eli's unique mind could maintain long after the guns stopped. It was the beginning of a quieter legacy. In the following days, the family adjusted. Adrian stopped attending every meeting, trusting Eli's observations instead. Rocco managed the logistics. Nora translated Eli's notes, and the operation stabilized. The rivals grew cautious, unsure how the Romanos always seemed one step ahead. Within the house, peace returned. Eli spent mornings sketching and afternoons walking through the garden. Nora had helped restore. He no longer avoided sunlight. Sometimes she caught him watching the way the leaves swayed in the wind, counting their rhythm under his breath. For the first time, his world and the real one were moving in sync. Nora became more than an employee. She was the bridge that connected Adrian's empire to his son's mind. She handled every conversation between them with patience. Adrian started calling her family in front of the others, a title that made her uneasy but proud. It wasn't wealth that tied them now, but trust. The boss had finally learned that not every act of strength came from force. Sometimes it came from compassion, the one thing power usually crushed. And every time Adrian looked at Eli, he saw proof that his family's future was no longer built on fear. Eli's transformation spread beyond the walls of the brownstone. He began designing new systems for the family businesses, improved security, cleaner accounting, and communication methods that reduced corruption. Adrian followed his lead, removing those who resisted. The Romano organization became more disciplined, more controlled, and oddly more peaceful. Fewer conflicts broke out. Profits increased quietly. Nora sometimes joked that Eli had turned a crime empire into a machine of efficiency. Adrian didn't laugh, but he didn't disagree either. He saw what she meant, that order had replaced chaos, and it was his son's doing. But order had a price. Eli's focus grew sharper, almost obsessive. He began spending longer hours alone, his sketches turning darker, filled with complex webs of lines that even Nora struggled to understand. She realized he wasn't drawing crime routes anymore. He was mapping human behavior, predicting outcomes, measuring reactions. It frightened her in a way she couldn't explain. She wondered if he understood how dangerous it was to know so much, to see too far ahead. The boy who once found beauty in light was now dissecting shadows, trying to make sense of things that never truly made sense. One morning, Adrian found Eli asleep at his desk, surrounded by pages of calculations. The sight softened him. He placed a blanket over his son and quietly left. In the hallway, he told Nora that he finally understood what Eli had been teaching him, that real control came not from fear, but from understanding the pattern beneath everything. He admitted he didn't know if he could ever fully learn it. Nora listened, realizing that Adrian was no longer the man who demanded loyalty. He had become someone searching for meaning. The empire had changed him too. Months passed, and the Romano name carried new respect. The rivals no longer dared to cross them, not because of guns, but because no one could outthink them. Adrian had turned his once violent empire into something invisible, a quiet system that ran flawlessly. Behind it all, Eli remained hidden, the unknown mind behind every decision. To the outside world, he didn't exist. Inside, Nora saw a balance forming. She knew it couldn't last forever, but for now it was peace, and peace in their world was rarer than anything money could buy. On a quiet evening, Nora found Eli standing by the window watching the city lights. He didn't move for a long time. Then he turned toward her and gestured to the space beside him. She joined him, and they stood silently, the reflection of the skyline, mirrored across the glass. She realized how far he'd come, from a boy ignored at a party to a man quietly shaping a city. His journey hadn't been loud, but it had changed everything. For the first time, she believed kindness could be as powerful as any threat. Eli picked up the same puzzle box she had given him long ago and turned it slowly in his hands. It clicked open for the first time, revealing a small silver sphere inside, identical to the one he had once held at the gala. He smiled faintly, as if closing a circle that had started that night. Nora smiled too, realizing the meaning. What began as an act of defiance had turned into a life rebuilt from understanding. The Empire stood stronger than ever, not because of power, but because of the quiet brilliance everyone once ignored. As the months rolled on, Nora realized she had become part of something she never planned for. She was no longer an outsider observing power from the edges. She was inside it now, shaping it quietly, beside Eli. Every decision Adrian made passed through their filter first. She kept detailed records, ensured everything matched Eli's predictions, and slowly began to understand his thinking. The patterns he saw weren't luck. They were precise, built on logic and rhythm. The Empire thrived, but Nora sometimes wondered if success could turn into its own kind of cage. Eli's ability grew faster than anyone could follow. He began solving problems before they even happened. He would hand Adrian sketches of systems and logistics that predicted issues days in advance. When shipments ran late, he already knew which driver would be responsible. When a deal fell through, he had already charted the reason. Adrian marveled at his son's gift, but Nora could see the toll it took. He rarely slept, barely ate, and spent nights awake in his study surrounded by endless paper. She feared that in fixing everyone's chaos, Eli might lose touch with his own peace. One afternoon, Adrian gathered his closest men for a private meeting. He announced his semi-retirement, giving Eli full oversight of the organization's structure. The room went silent. Some men applauded, others exchanged wary glances. No one dared to question him openly. Nora stood in the back, watching the moment unfold. She knew Adrian was doing what he thought was right, but she also knew the world outside their walls wasn't ready for someone like Eli to lead. There would be challenges, not of intellect, but of loyalty. And loyalty in their world had always come with a price. After the announcement, Rocco warned Nora that not everyone accepted the decision. Some men whispered that a boy who barely spoke couldn't run the business. Others feared what they didn't understand. Nora told Eli about it carefully, worried the gossip would bother him. Instead, he listened calmly and drew another diagram, this time of people, not places. He connected their names with arrows, mapping influence and trust. When he finished, he circled one name in red. Nora recognized it immediately. Franco, the same man whose false invoice he had once uncovered. Trouble was building again. Adrian ignored the rumors at first, confident his authority was enough. But Nora sensed the shift in the air, the way guards looked away when Eli entered a room, the silence that followed his footsteps. He didn't seem to notice or care. His world stayed mathematical, unemotional. He kept working, refining the structure. Nora worried the family's enemies wouldn't come from the outside, this time, but from within. She tried to warn Adrian gently, reminding him that fear made people desperate. He listened but didn't act. Old habits of control still guided him more than trust. Days later, Franco came to the brownstone pretending respect. He congratulated Eli on his new role, smiling too much, speaking too sweetly. Adrian accepted the gesture, believing it sincere. But Nora saw the tension in Franco's movements, the way his hand trembled slightly when he adjusted his cufflinks. Eli saw it too. He stared at Franco's shoes, watching their small, uneven taps against the floor. He turned to his sketchbook and wrote something down, 2 numbers and a line. Nora didn't understand until later that night, when Adrian's accountant called about missing funds. Eli had already predicted it. That night, Adrian called an emergency meeting. He demanded answers about the missing money. Everyone denied involvement. Franco acted offended, swearing loyalty. Eli sat in silence, eyes on the floor. Nora noticed his hand moving along the table's edge in a pattern. 4 taps, then 2. She realized he was marking something. When the conversation ended, she checked the seat arrangement and saw the pattern matched Franco's position. Eli had already identified the thief. She told Adrian privately afterward. The boss didn't respond immediately. He poured himself a drink, then said he would handle it quietly. The next morning, Franco disappeared. The staff didn't ask questions, and no one mentioned his name again. The message was clear. Adrian's rules still applied, but Eli's judgment carried weight now. The organization fell silent for days, moving more carefully than before. Nora felt uneasy about the balance between justice and survival. She wondered how much of this was still Eli's vision, and how much was Adrian protecting his old way of power. Eli didn't seem troubled. He returned to his sketches, his mind already working on something new, something larger. His focus never lingered on punishment. Nora began to notice a new side of him. He wasn't the quiet boy anymore. He was confident in small, unspoken ways. When people entered the room, they waited for his approval before speaking. His calmness commanded attention without threat. She saw the respect growing around him and felt proud, though part of her missed the soft wonder he once had. The world had finally seen his worth, but at the cost of his gentleness, he no longer stared at the chandelier for comfort. He looked at the whole structure, knowing exactly how to rebuild or destroy it. Adrian watched all this with a mixture of pride and worry. He could see that Eli's influence reached further than he expected. Business partners now deferred to him. Rivals called him the silent strategist. Adrian knew what that meant. Power had shifted. For the first time in his life, he was no longer the center of the Romano Empire. He didn't resent it, but it unsettled him. He wondered if his son's strength came from clarity or detachment. Either way, there was no stopping it. The family had found its new leader and there was no turning back. Rocco, loyal as ever, stayed close to Eli. He acted as translator between his quiet logic and the outside world. Nora often joined them, smoothing the rough edges between the two. Together they created balance. Eli the mind, Rocco the hand, and Nora the voice. It worked perfectly for a while. The Romano name grew stronger, cleaner, more stable than it had been in decades. For the first time, the family wasn't feared for violence but respected for efficiency. And behind every decision, behind every quiet success, stood the young man everyone once ignored. As peace settled over the empire, Nora tried to give Eli normal moments. Dinners, short walks, time away from ledgers and maps. Sometimes he joined her, sometimes he didn't. On good days he talked in short sentences about small things like the way sunlight bent through glass, or how the garden fountain's ripples followed a perfect pattern. Those were the moments when he seemed most human, most himself. She held on to those times, knowing the world around them would never stay calm for long. In their world, peace always carried an expiration date. That expiration came quietly. One evening, Adrian received an anonymous warning that police were planning a raid on one of their front businesses. It wasn't unusual, but something about it felt deliberate. He handed the message to Eli. The boy studied it carefully, scanning every line, then wrote a single word in the corner. Inside. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Eli believed the leak came from within their own men again. Nora's stomach tightened. Another betrayal meant another round of violence, something Eli hated but couldn't stop. The cycle was beginning to repeat, and this time it might cost more. Eli began working on his analysis through the night. He covered the library walls with papers, connecting details with string and symbols. Nora watched him draw invisible lines between events, names, and numbers. His process looked chaotic, but had a hidden order only he could see. By morning, he had circled 3 names, men close to Adrian, ones who had everything to gain from another power shift. He didn't ask for revenge. He simply showed his father the web. Adrian stared at it for a long time, then folded the paper and said he would take care of it. Nora feared what taking care of it meant. She confronted Adrian privately, asking him not to return to the old ways. He listened, tired but unmoved. He said some lessons had to be taught permanently. She wanted to argue but stopped. This was his world, not hers. Later she told Eli that his father had handled it. He didn't ask how. He only erased the names from his map and added new lines, building the pattern again. To him, systems didn't end. They evolved. Nora realized that was both his gift and his curse. He never stopped analyzing. The next weeks were uneasy. The organization stabilized again, but a quiet heaviness settled over the house. Adrian seemed distant, buried in reflection. He began spending more time with his son, sitting beside him during his work, asking questions about logic and decisions. Nora saw the two of them forming a strange connection, not through emotion, but through structure. It wasn't warmth, but understanding. They had both been trying to control chaos all their lives in different ways. Now they finally saw themselves in each other. It was imperfect, but it was something close to peace. One afternoon, Adrian took Nora aside and asked her to stay with the family permanently. He offered her anything she wanted: salary, property, security. She declined most of it, but agreed to remain close. She said she wasn't there for wealth, only for Eli's well-being. Adrian nodded, almost relieved. He admitted he didn't know how to connect with his son fully, but he knew she could. He told her that as long as she stayed, Eli would never be alone again. It was the first time he sounded less like a boss and more like a father. Time passed quietly. The city moved on, and the Romano family became less visible but more powerful. Eli's role remained secret. Few outside the circle knew his influence, but those who did treated it with reverence. Nora continued to serve as his link to the world, translating his logic into actions. She noticed how the men spoke differently now. Less arrogance, more precision. Adrian had achieved something no mafia leader ever had: peace through control. And all of it began with a simple act of empathy on a ballroom floor years ago. Sometimes Nora thought about that night, the lights, the music, the crowd, how a small decision had rewritten the lives of so many powerful people. If she had looked away, the boy in the corner might have stayed invisible forever. She wondered if fate existed, or if it was just a chain of patterns like Eli believed. Maybe both. When she asked him about it once, he simply wrote, "Choice creates pattern." That was his answer for everything. Simple, clear, and true in its own way. She had learned to accept that as wisdom. One morning, Nora woke to find the library empty. Eli's sketches were gone, the table cleared. Panic flashed through her until she saw him outside in the garden with Adrian. They were walking side by side, quietly talking. She couldn't hear the words, but the image filled her with calm. The boy who once couldn't stand the world's noise was now standing in it comfortably. Adrian pointed toward the skyline, speaking slowly, and Eli nodded. Nora realized that this was what she had worked for. Not power or wealth, but connection. A father finally seeing his son. That night, Adrian gathered his most trusted men and announced a restructuring. He was transferring full control to Eli, officially naming him head of operations. There was no applause this time, only respect. Everyone understood the new order. Adrian would remain as advisor, Rocco as protector, and Nora as Eli's confidant. The organization accepted it quietly. It was the cleanest transition of power anyone had seen. And through it all, Eli said nothing. He simply placed his hand on the table once, signaling agreement. The room followed that silent gesture more than any speech Adrian ever made. Nora stood at the back of the room, overwhelmed by how far he had come. The once invisible boy had become the one everyone followed. Adrian caught her eye and nodded, as if thanking her without words. After the meeting, Eli returned to his sketches, calmer than ever. He was no longer proving himself to anyone. He was maintaining balance, keeping order in a world that rarely allowed it. Nora wondered if he even knew the magnitude of what he had achieved, or if he saw it as another pattern, another system functioning as it should. The following weeks brought stability unlike anything the Romano family had known. Rivals stayed quiet, authorities backed off, and internal loyalty strengthened. For the first time, the city's underworld ran without chaos. People whispered that the Romano name had become untouchable. Nora saw something even greater: harmony. Eli had built a world that didn't rely on fear or cruelty. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. She spent evenings reading to him while he sketched, their quiet companionship filling the space once occupied by violence. The empire was at peace, and so were its unlikely architects. Adrian began spending more time away from business, visiting old friends and tending to the vineyard outside the city. He said he finally trusted the system his son had built. He told Nora he could retire knowing the family was safe. She noticed how relaxed he had become, how the weight that once defined him was fading. Power had always been his curse, but Eli had turned it into structure, something sustainable. For the first time, the Romano Empire no longer belonged to one man. It belonged to a legacy built on intellect and understanding. On the anniversary of the gala, Adrian hosted a small gathering at the same ballroom. This time it wasn't a display of wealth, but a quiet celebration of survival. Nora stood beside Eli, near the same marble floor where they had first danced. The chandeliers glowed softly above them, and the guests watched with quiet respect. Adrian raised a glass and said a few words about change and family. Then the band began to play a slow waltz. Eli looked at Nora, extended his hand again, and together they stepped onto the floor where everything had begun. The music filled the ballroom softly, not with power but with peace. Eli and Nora moved slowly, their steps almost identical to the dance that had changed their lives. The crowd watched in silence, sensing the meaning behind it. Adrian stood near the edge of the floor, his eyes glistening with pride. It was no longer about appearances or business. It was about family, about redemption, For the first time, Eli didn't look at the chandelier or count the lights. He looked forward, meeting every gaze without fear. The boy who once hid from the world now led it. When the dance ended, applause filled the room. It wasn't loud or forced, it was genuine. Adrian stepped forward, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. The gesture said more than any speech could. Nora smiled quietly, knowing the moment had come full circle. The same hands that once trembled now held the world steady. Guests whispered that the Romano family had changed, that it wasn't ruled by fear anymore. No one dared say it aloud, but everyone knew the truth. Compassion had rebuilt an empire. What power destroyed, kindness had healed. Later that evening, as the guests began leaving, Adrian walked onto the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered in the distance, alive and calm. Nora joined him, standing beside the man who once terrified half the city. He admitted something he had never said before, that for years he had been blind to the things that mattered. He said Eli taught him that control wasn't power, understanding was. Nora told him it wasn't too late to live differently. Adrian nodded, his face softening in the moonlight. He looked at peace, the weight of decades slowly lifting. Inside, Eli sat at the piano, fingers moving over the keys in hesitant rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The sound carried through the empty ballroom, echoing softly off the walls. Nora listened from the doorway, her heart swelling. She had seen him go from isolation to connection, from silence to music. Adrian returned and watched too, his eyes filled with pride and disbelief. No business deal, no fortune had ever meant more than this. For once, the Romano name wasn't feared, it was respected. It had become something entirely new. In the days that followed, life settled into a calm routine. Adrian retired completely, moving to the countryside home he had built long ago. Rocco remained at Eli's side, guarding not just his life but his peace. Nora managed the day-to-day affairs of the empire, ensuring it stayed grounded in the balance Eli had created. Under his guidance, the organization turned legitimate, investing in technology, art, and education. The same mind that once mapped crime routes now designed systems that served people. Eli's silence had become a symbol of wisdom, his calm presence shaping everything around him. Sometimes Nora wondered if he ever missed the chaos, the intensity that had once defined their world. When she asked, he simply shook his head. He told her that chaos never leaves, it only changes form. He said his peace came from understanding it, not escaping it. She realized he didn't see the world like others did. To him, everything was a pattern waiting to be understood, including love, loss, and redemption. That perspective had saved them all, and yet he never claimed credit. He just kept moving forward, quietly building order where others only saw noise. One evening, while reviewing reports in the library, Nora found one of Eli's old sketches tucked inside a book. It was the drawing of the ballroom, the chandelier, the crowd, and herself reaching out to him. At the bottom, in his careful handwriting, were 3 words, the first pattern. She smiled, realizing he had seen that moment as the beginning of everything. She carefully framed the sketch and placed it above the fireplace. When Eli saw it the next morning, he didn't say a word, he just nodded once, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Years passed quietly. The Romano name faded from headlines but grew in influence. The city became safer, cleaner, and oddly balanced. People whispered about unseen systems that kept everything in order. Some said it was luck, others said it was fear. Only a few knew it was one man's logic guiding from the shadows. Eli rarely appeared in public, but when he did, his presence carried weight. He didn't need to speak to command attention anymore. His calm, his precision, his stillness, all of it reminded people that power didn't need to roar to be heard. Nora stayed by his side through it all. She never sought glory or status, though she could have had both. She found purpose in being the bridge between worlds, the woman who helped the quiet boy speak to the world that once ignored him. Together they built a new kind of legacy. Sometimes when the city lights dimmed late at night, she'd look out from the balcony and wonder how many lives had changed because of that one decision, to dance when no one else would. The thought always brought a quiet, lasting peace to her heart. Adrian visited occasionally. Older now, his strength replaced by serenity. He spent hours in conversation with Eli, more as a student than a father. They spoke of structure, balance, and purpose. Adrian once said he had built an empire out of fear and nearly lost everything because of it. Eli had rebuilt it with patience and saved it. Nora often listened quietly during these talks, knowing they were the closest thing to love either man could express. The old and the new world had finally met, and for once they coexisted without tearing each other apart. One rainy night, Adrian fell ill. The doctor came and went, but age had its way. Ely sat by his father's bed in silence, tracing slow circles on the blanket with his fingers, the same pattern he used to calm himself as a child. When Adrian finally opened his eyes, he smiled faintly. He told his son he was proud, not for the empire, but for who he had become. He said Ely had done what he never could, brought peace to a world built on conflict. Those were his final words. He passed quietly, without fear. The funeral was private, simple, attended by only a few. The city mourned in its own way. For many, Adrian had been a symbol of power. For those who knew him closely, he was a man redeemed. Nora stood beside Ely, watching the rain fall on the graveside. He didn't cry, but his hand tightened around hers. She knew what that meant. Emotion didn't always need words. As the last shovelful of dirt fell, Ely whispered something she barely caught. No more patterns, just peace. She held his hand tighter, understanding it was both an ending and a promise. After Adrian's passing, Ely took a step back from the organization. He handed operations to trusted partners trained under his guidance. He spent more time studying architecture, science, and philosophy. He said understanding how things worked made him feel alive. Nora supported him, turning the brownstone into a quiet retreat filled with books and music instead of business. The house that once echoed with tension now radiated calm. The sound of footsteps, once guarded and cautious, was now steady and peaceful. It felt like the empire had finally found its soul. Years later, Ely began giving anonymous donations to schools, hospitals, and orphanages. No one knew where the money came from, but it always arrived when needed most. People called it the Rewrote Fund, though no one could prove who was behind it. Nora managed the logistics quietly, ensuring everything stayed hidden. She often smiled at the irony. The mafia empire that once took from others now gave back. The same precision Ely once used for survival had become his way of restoring balance to the world he had once feared. His legacy had evolved again. Ely grew older, his hair graying at the temples, but his eyes stayed sharp. He still spent hours sketching, his lines softer now, less mechanical, more human. Nora watched him one afternoon drawing the city skyline, adding small details like trees, bridges, and lights. When she asked what he was making, he replied, "A world that makes sense." She smiled, knowing he'd been doing that his entire life. The difference now was that he wasn't fixing broken systems, he was celebrating the ones that worked. His mind, once a fortress, had finally opened to the beauty of simplicity. One summer morning, Nora found a letter on her desk written in Eli's precise handwriting. It wasn't long, just a few lines. He thanked her for seeing him when no one else did, for teaching him that kindness was a language too. He said every structure he built, every pattern he solved, began with that lesson. Nora folded the letter carefully, tears filling her eyes. It reminded her that even geniuses needed someone to believe in them. Without that moment of courage years ago, the world would have lost not just a man but the peace he created. Time moved gently in the years that followed. The city thrived quietly under systems Ely had designed long ago. Few remembered his name, and that was how he wanted it. He said true order didn't need a face. Nora continued his work after he passed, protecting his memory the way he had protected the world from falling apart. People spoke of an age of balance that began without warning, shaped by invisible hands. They never knew the story behind it, and they didn't have to. The results spoke louder than any legend could. Nora kept the brownstone exactly as it had been, the books, the drawings, the puzzle box on the shelf. Sometimes she played the piano softly, replaying the tune Ely once learned. The notes filled the empty rooms like echoes of the past. She often thought about how everything had started with a simple act of courage in a room full of judgment. She never saw herself as a hero, but she understood now how small choices could ripple outward, reshaping lives, cities, even generations. Every note she played carried that truth into the quiet night. Years later, when historians spoke about the Romano family, they described a transformation no one could explain. They said the empire turned from violence to order almost overnight. They debated who was responsible, Adrian, his mysterious son, or some unseen advisor. No one ever guessed the truth. The real story was never about money or crime. It was about connection, a waitress who saw a lonely boy, and a boy who saw the world differently. Their meeting rewrote what power could mean, proving that empathy could accomplish what violence never could. In the city square, a small plaque appeared one day. It read, "Peace is the pattern we choose." No one knew who placed it there, but people often stopped to take pictures. Some said it was a memorial to Adrian Romano, others believed it came from his son. Nora visited it quietly one afternoon, standing among strangers who didn't recognize her. She smiled, knowing the truth. It wasn't about who did it. It was about the message itself, the legacy of a life built on order, compassion, and the courage to see what others ignore. She returned home that evening and walked through the quiet halls. The framed sketch of the ballroom still hung above the fireplace. She stood before it, remembering that moment when everything began, when she broke the rule of silence and reached out her hand. She whispered a soft thank you to the past, to the version of herself who dared to care. Outside, the city lights flickered in the same rhythm. Eli once loved to count. For the first time in years, she felt truly at peace, knowing the world had finally caught his rhythm. The seasons changed and Nora grew older. She continued managing the charitable foundations quietly, keeping Eli's systems running. Young people she mentored often asked why she worked so tirelessly when she could retire comfortably. She always gave the same answer: because peace needs maintenance. It was a lesson Eli had taught her without words. Every structure, no matter how perfect, needed care to stay upright. And so she stayed, ensuring that his legacy endured not through fame, but through consistency, the same way he had built it, the same way he had lived. On her final evening, Nora sat by the fireplace, the piano playing softly in the background from an old recording. The light from the chandelier reflected gently across the floor. She held the silver sphere in her palm, the same one Eli once carried everywhere. Its surface was smooth and cool, timeless. She whispered, "You were right. Patterns never end." Closing her eyes, she leaned back, her breathing steady. The house was quiet, filled with memories instead of sorrow. The pattern had completed itself, full circle, beautiful, and unbroken. When the staff found her the next morning, she was peaceful, her hands folded neatly, the silver sphere resting beside her. They notified the foundation's board, and her passing made brief news. Few people outside her circle knew who she truly was, but those who did spoke of her kindness, her intelligence, and her mysterious connection to the city's unseen order. Somewhere in the archives, her letter from Eli remained sealed, her only personal treasure. The story of their bond became a quiet legend, whispered among those who still believed in miracles born from empathy. Years later, a young boy visiting the city's art museum stopped before an unmarked sketch framed in the corner. It showed a chandelier, a crowd frozen mid-dance, and a woman holding out her hand to a man in a black suit. The plaque beneath it read only, "The dance that changed everything." The boy stared at it for a long time, not knowing why it moved him so deeply. Somewhere beyond words, the pattern continued. The rhythm of kindness passed on, unseen but unending, echoing through every soul brave enough to notice.